Our queen was born at the end of the 15th century in the politicized lands of Europe. The moment she was born, her destiny was already written by others. She was not just a child, she was a pawn. With noble blood coursing through his veins, the dreams growing in his heart did not even fit within the walls of his own palace. His name belonged to one of the most important dynasties of the time. His father had seen wars and his mother was part of a past woven with palace intrigue. But her world was not filled with cotton beds like in fairy tales, nor with laughter echoing through the corridors. All her life she had whispered that one day she would be queen, but it was more of a chain than a crown. Even as a child, she grew up alone. With nannies, Governnesses, with nannies, governesses, but never with her own mother. Never with her own mother. As a court custom, emotional bonds were weakened. Queens had no right to cry. They were only supposed to die with grace, and she was taught this truth at the age of 7. She ate alone. She walked alone, dressed alone, but she never stopped dreaming. One day I will marry someone I love, a servant told me years later as he watched the jasmine in the palace garden. No one told him not to daydream to his face, but her every move, every step, every sentence was under observation. Because when she grew up, she would not be a queen, she would be a living part of a peace treaty. He learned Latin at an early age. He had a great interest in music, literature, and especially folk culture. But no matter how much she learned, her destiny always pointed in one direction. One day, in a foreign land, she would marry a man she did not know and become the queen of another people. And when that day came, the crown she wore as a child would be replaced by a contract ... written in blood. Her wedding dress, the shroud of her freedom ... The palace she would go to would be her tomb. There are some marriages in history that were written not by love but by the maps of the land. The fate of two peoples is tried to be changed with a wedding, and the women who become brides at these weddings are often not the authors of their own stories. Our queen was one of them. She was not yet 14 years old when her name was written in the footnotes of a peace treaty. The talk in the palaces was clear. This marriage will end wars. This marriage will unite two enemy dynasties. This marriage will shape history. But no one talked about how this marriage would shatter the dreams of a young girl. The would-be king was almost twice her age. He had a harsh temperament. He had been having a secret affair with another woman for years, and it was whispered about in the corridors of the palace. There was no room for a new queen, but that crown needed a window dressing. Our queen was the name of that window dressing. One morning, a marriage contract was placed before our queen. It is said that her hand trembled as she put her seal on it. A servant told me years later that the young girl prayed alone that night. She had tears in her eyes. She whispered only one sentence. "There will be no one left to remember me, will there?" Preparations for the wedding began. The wedding dress was sewn, the ceremony hall was arranged, the foreign envoys were on their way, but our queen's eyes saw none of this splendor. In her eyes, this ceremony was not a celebration. It was an exile. She was to be torn away from the land where she was born and raised, and sent to a country where she would never again be able to say a prayer in her own language. And when that journey began, our queen never looked back. Because there was no childhood, no family, no freedom to leave behind. Before him, a foreign king, a cold crown, and silent final steps. It was a day for the history books to write in golden letters. A new queen was to be crowned. The palace was decorated. The streets were covered with flowers, and the people were counting the hours with excitement. But inside, behind the stone walls of that palace, there was another world that no one could see. Our queen was woken up before dawn to get ready, while the palace's most experienced bridesmaids dressed her in her wedding gown made of the finest fabrics. She was just quietly listening to the birdsong outside. Her face was expression listening to the birdsong outside. The big day that a young girl should dream of was now just an obligatory ceremony. The coronation hall was at the height of splendor. Light filtered through the marble columns, illuminating the huge golden throne in the center of the hall. Though the people were not inside, nobles, clergy, and foreign ambassadors lined the hall. Each of them was observing how the young queen stood, how she walked, how she looked, and she took each step numb inside. When she arrived in front of the throne, silence fell. The archbishop approached with heavy steps, the crown in his hand almost trembling. It was made of gold and decorated with hundreds of stones. But to the queen, those stones were like thousands of pounds of chain. When the crown was placed on her head amid the archbishop's prayers, the crowd cheered. But the queen's eyes were fixed on only one spot, the open sky through the large window in the hall. In that moment, perhaps for the last time, she felt what it meant to be free. The ceremony was followed by a grand banquet. Golden candlesticks, huge dining tables, orchestras. The corridors of the palace were filled with music and laughter, but our queen's room was silent. Throughout the banquet, everyone talked about how beautiful she was, her graceful walk, how royal she looked. But no one noticed her slowly fading soul. The queen? She was alone that night. She had regained her throne, yes, but she had also stepped into the final act of her life, and no one knew if she would survive the night. That night was written in the history books as a wedding night, but in fact, it was a funeral. When our queen retired to her room after the ceremony, music was still playing in the palace. The feast continued. The wine was raised. The dances were danced. But after the door to her chamber closed quietly, no sound escaped. Behind that door, a young woman's life turned dark in minutes. According to official records, the queen was stricken with a sudden illness that night. High fever, chills, shortness of breath, and then in the morning, death. But witnesses said the expression on the queen's face suggested fear rather than illness. Her face was pale, but her eyes were open to the last moment. It was as if she had seen something, as if she had locked eyes with someone. It was as if death had not crept in silently. It had been invited. Doctors said it was a contagious infection. Some suspected food poisoning, but the silent whisperers had already carved the word poison into the stone walls of the palace. Poisoning? An accident? Or was it an execution? For a king to have a wife die on the night of his coronation, was it bad luck or a plan? After the queen's death, the king shed no tears. No mourning was declared. The ceremony continued in the morning. Palace officials quickly hushed it up. The queen's body was quickly removed, locked in a room without explanation. Some palace officials disappeared the next day. Some of their bodies were found by the riverside. Was this hush money? Or were witnesses to a dangerous secret silenced? Not even the queen's funeral. No public ceremony. No farewell. Soon after, the queen's name began to disappear from palace documents. Her portrait was removed. It was as if she had never lived. But some palace staff said the same thing years later. Every night a whisper could be heard from that room. It was as if that queen was still trapped in that night. And so, a wedding night turned into one of history's most silent murders. Only a few days after the queen's death, the palace fell silent. The music stopped. The laughter stopped. The gold-leafed walls of the palace now heard only whispers. The people waited for an official announcement of mourning, but it never came. The queen's name was never mentioned. It was as if that crown had never been worn, that wedding had never taken place, that woman had never existed. But the memory of history never forgets. What happened in the palace after the queen's death was now the talk not only of historians, but also of the people. A rumor began to spread among the people. It wasn't just poison that killed the queen that night. It was a curse, and that curse was not buried with the queen. It lived on inside the palace. First, one of the king's advisors was found dead in his room a few weeks after the wedding. An unexplained cardiac arrest, they said, but the look of horror on his face told a different story. Then the tailor who made the queen's wedding dress, he was found in his own shop in the middle of the night, barefoot and insane. He kept whispering the same sentence. The crown looked into my eyes, and it burned me. Some of the night porters said they heard footsteps coming from the room where the queen stayed on her last night. Every time they opened the door, the room was empty, but there was always a new rose petal on the floor. But no roses had been placed in the room that night. The palace servants changed the lock, removed the furniture, but the curse was no longer in the furniture. It was in the walls. Everyone who entered that room either fell ill or fell silent. Years later, when a historian wanted to put the queen's name back on record, he realized that many of the documents were missing. Some had been torn up, some burned. All that remained was a single sentence. It was written in a bridesmaid's diary. Our queen is dead, but her story lives on ... and every night that crown still seeks a victim. So was it really a disease, an assassination? Or was a curse born that night that history cannot silence? The queen's name may have been erased, but her story comes alive a little more each time it is told. And who knows, maybe as you watch this video,